This happened in the summer of 2019, when I was 21. I was back home at my parents' place for a few months, and one afternoon, I decided, pretty much on a whim, that I'd go camp out in the woods behind their house. It wasn't anything unusual for me. I'd done this kind of thing plenty of times growing up. Their property stretched back into miles of trees, thick, quiet forest with no trails, no cabins, no neighbors. Most kids I knew were always a little spooked by it, but for me, it had always been a kind of playground. I'd built forts out there as a kid, wandered for hours as a teenager, and camped alone more than once. It was familiar, safe, or at least I thought it was. That day I packed my small camping bag, told my parents I'd be out there for the night, and set off around 4 in the afternoon. The air was warm, the cicadas buzzing lazily, the woods dappled with sunlight filtering through the leaves. I walked for maybe an hour before finding a clearing that felt right. Flat ground, open sky above, enough space for a small fire. I pitched my tent, cleared a ring for the fire, and lit it as the sun dipped lower. It was perfect. I had the whole forest to myself, the sky glowing orange through the trees, the fire crackling. It felt like exactly the kind of night I wanted. But that calm didn't last long. Just as the sun touched the treetops, I heard it, a man's voice. At first it was faint, like a low mutter drifting through the trees. I froze, listening harder, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But it kept going, fragmented words, the tone shifting, like he was having a one-sided conversation. What unsettled me most was how I couldn't tell where it was coming from. The sound seemed to move, echoing between the trees, bouncing around until it felt like it was everywhere at once. I sat there by my fire, trying to convince myself it was just someone passing through, maybe a hunter or another camper. But these woods weren't exactly popular. There weren't trails out here. Running into another person by chance would have been incredibly rare. 5 minutes passed. The voice never came closer, never drifted away. It just lingered, circling me.
Finally, I called out, "Hello?" The instant the word left my mouth, the muttering stopped. The forest dropped into silence, not even crickets. I swallowed hard and called out again. Nothing. Now I was more unnerved than ever. The sun was almost gone, shadows thickening. I decided not to risk it. I doused the fire, stuffed my gear back into my bag, and moved on. Better to lose half an hour of setup than sit there all night, jumpy and paranoid, with someone lurking nearby. I headed deeper into the woods, moving fast as the light faded. After 15 minutes, I hadn't found anything ideal, but the darkness was closing in fast. I finally just chose a spot between the trees, leveled out the ground as best I could, and set up my tent again. By the time I finished, night had swallowed the forest. No stars yet, just blackness and silence. Oddly enough, the silence gave me a strange sense of comfort. Out here, in total dark, I figured I'd hear anyone coming long before they got close. The woods amplify every snap of a twig, every crunch of a leaf. I built another small fire, let its warmth seep into me, and pulled out my bag of snacks. Marshmallows, chocolate, graham crackers, the essentials. There's something almost childlike about roasting marshmallows in the woods, something that makes you forget your worries. For a while, it worked. I sat there, savoring the firelight, eating s'mores, telling myself I had overreacted earlier. Hours slipped by. The fire burned down to embers. My body relaxed. I thought maybe I'd even sleep better out here than I had in months. And then I heard it. Crunch. Leaves shifting behind me, off to the left, slow, steady, deliberate. I turned toward the sound, but the second I looked, it stopped. My pulse spiked. "Hello?" I called again, voice tight. For a moment, nothing. Then, from the opposite direction, a man stepped into the firelight. I jumped, the shock nearly knocking me backwards. He was middle-aged, unshaven, wearing an old jacket. His expression was oddly casual, almost friendly. He raised his hand slightly toward the fire and smiled. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. walking right up and sitting down at the edge of the firelight, as if we were friends meeting by chance. He held his palms out to warm them, staring into the flames. My mind raced. Can I help you? I think you're at the wrong campsite," I managed to say. He didn't even look at me. No. That was it. Just one word. The way he said it sent a shiver crawling up my spine. I didn't know which part he was denying, that he was in the wrong place or that I could help him. Either way, it was wrong. We sat there in silence, the fire crackling between us. I couldn't think of what to do. Leave? Confront him? My voice felt stuck in my throat. Finally, just to fill the silence, I asked, "Do you happen to be the one I heard talking out in the trees earlier?" The man's face shifted. His smile dropped. His eyes went flat. "Must have been someone else," he said, his voice colder now. A twig snapped behind me. My blood ran cold. I knew then he wasn't alone. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch movement in the corner of my eye. Another figure, shadowy, standing just outside the ring of light. When I looked back, the man at the fire was watching me, his eyes empty, unblinking, locked on mine. I don't even remember deciding to move. My body just reacted. I shot up, bolted into the trees. Behind me, I heard one of them yell, their voice sharp with frustration. Branches cracked, footsteps pounded after me. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. Branches whipped my face, roots threatened to trip me, but adrenaline kept me upright. Every step I expected a hand to grab my shoulder, to yank me down. But I grew up in these woods. Even in the dark, I knew the landmarks, the dips in the ground, the faint outline of the road through the trees. I used every ounce of that childhood knowledge, weaving through paths only I knew, until the sounds behind me grew fainter. Finally, the forest opened to the gravel road leading back to my parents' house. I sprinted the rest of the way, lungs burning, legs screaming. When I burst through the door, pale and shaking, I could barely form words. My parents called 911 immediately. The next morning, with daylight on our side, I went back with the police. We followed my steps into the woods, retracing my panicked escape until we reached the campsite. It was empty. My tent, my gear, the fire pit, gone. Not just gone, cleared out, as if nobody had been there at all. That fact still unsettles me more than anything. If it had just been an attempted robbery, why take the time to erase all evidence? Why clear everything so thoroughly? The police searched the surrounding woods, but found nothing. No footprints, no left-behind gear, no signs of where they had gone. What I do know is that at least 2 men were out there that night. One who sat with me by the fire, the other hiding in the trees. Whether their plan was to rob me, hurt me, or worse, I'll never know. What I do know is that one of them chased me. And if I hadn't known those woods so well, if I hadn't run without looking back, I might not have made it home. Needless to say, I never camped in those woods again. Even now, when I visit my parents, I can't look at those trees the same way. In the daylight, they're just forest. But once the sun starts setting, I remember the voice echoing between the trees, the stranger's flat denial, and that cold look in his eyes. And I know that whatever their intentions were, they weren't good.
It was the middle of summer when this whole thing happened. And even now, years later, I can't get it out of my head. I've always been into backpacking, sleeping under the stars, pushing myself deep into the forest, away from people, away from noise. That year, though, I wanted to try something different. A buddy of mine had told me about these old fire lookout towers you could rent. They were basically abandoned stations where rangers once used to scan the horizon for smoke. Most of them were shut down decades ago, but a few had been opened up for the public to book. The thing that caught my attention was that most of these towers were ridiculously remote. I'm talking miles and miles into the forest, often on mountaintops. Some people would call that a red flag. To me, it sounded like paradise. When I checked online, one particular lookout immediately stood out to me. It was further out than the rest, and had almost no bookings, which was strange given the season. Usually summer months are packed with people trying to snag one of these rare spots, but this one, practically wide open. At the time, I thought I just lucked out. There was only a single photo of the tower available, some faded black and white image that looked like it had been scanned from a history book. You couldn't make out much, just a square little cabin raised off the ground by maybe 10 or 15 feet. It didn't look like one of those tall, spindly towers balanced high above the trees, more like a boxy cabin on short stilts. Supposedly, it had been built in the 1950s. Beyond that, I had no clue what I was walking into. I started my hike early, around 9 in the morning. The first stretch was brutal. The trail barely even qualified as a trail anymore. It was overgrown, steep, and swallowed in thick forest. By hour 5, though, the landscape opened a little, and I caught my first glimpse of the tower. Far off in the distance, perched on a ridge, it looked small and fragile against the vast forest. Seeing it gave me a surge of energy. I pushed on until I finally reached it close to late afternoon. The view was incredible. From up there, the world seemed endless, waves of treetops stretching in every direction, mountains painted against the horizon. But the tower itself, that was another story. It was worn down, patched here and there with newer wood, but most of it was weathered and brittle. A staircase of maybe 20 steps wound up to a wraparound deck, and the inside was almost completely bare. No furniture, just dusty wooden floorboards, windows on every wall, and the faint smell of rot mixed with pine. It wasn't cozy by any means, but it didn't matter. I had this whole mountaintop to myself. That was worth any amount of discomfort.
I dropped my pack, made some quick food, and spent the rest of the daylight leaning against the railing, soaking in the silence. The forest down below was endless and still, the kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of every tiny sound. By the time the sun dipped, I was wiped out. I unrolled my bag on the floor and stretched out, ready to crash. I must have been lying there for half an hour, just waiting for sleep to come, when I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the creak of wood, maybe an animal brushing against the base of the tower. But then it became undeniable. Someone was climbing the stairs. My stomach dropped. I scrambled out of my bag, heart pounding. The door to the tower had no lock. Before I even had time to process what I'd do, a figure appeared in the doorway. He was a man, maybe late 40s, with long blonde hair and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. What unsettled me most was how unsurprised he looked to see me there. "Great place to stay a few nights, isn't it?" he said, walking right up like we were old friends. I tried to steady my voice and told him I had booked it for the next 3 nights. He just kept grinning. Something about the way he stood there, casual but expectant, made my skin crawl. I asked if he was camping nearby. "Actually," he said, "I was hoping to stay here tonight." The way he said it wasn't a request. It was more like a statement of intent. I forced a smile and lied, telling him a friend of mine was just minutes away and would be joining me soon. That seemed to shift his expression. The grin faded, his eyes lingered on me, and then, without a word, he nodded and turned to leave. That's when I noticed he had no backpack, no tent, no gear, no supplies, nothing. Out here, miles from the nearest road. That made 0 sense. Even after he left, I couldn't shake the image of him. I stayed up for hours, staring out the window into the trees, half expecting him to come back. Eventually, exhaustion dragged me under. Morning came. The sunlight made me feel a little foolish about how rattled I'd been. I made coffee, ate, and finally decided to walk down the steps. That's when I saw it. Pinned to the railing at the bottom of the staircase was a piece of paper. One word: sorry. Next to it, a smiley face. The air left my lungs. That note hadn't been there when I went to bed. That meant while I was sleeping, he had come back. He had walked up to the tower. He had been right beneath me while I was out cold. I told myself it was just weird, maybe even pathetic, but not dangerous. But deep down, a knot of dread had already started forming. That day passed uneventfully. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. By nightfall, though, unease crept back in. I left a lantern hanging on the wall, its glow spilling weakly across the wooden boards. Around midnight, I decided to step down into the forest to take a leak. As I reached the tree line, something moved. Just the faintest shift in the dark, like someone pulling back behind a tree. "Hello?" I called out. Nothing. The silence pressed in heavy, and every hair on my body stood up. I bolted back up the stairs. Inside the tower, the lantern suddenly felt like a mistake. Anyone outside could see me crystal clear through the windows, while I could see nothing but black beyond the glass. I stood frozen, eyes locked on the staircase below. That's when I saw him. A figure, half obscured by the railings, standing at the bottom of the stairs, just standing there, staring at the first step. I knew instantly it was the same man, the long hair, the shape, no gear, just him. I watched for what felt like forever, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. Finally, he moved, a few slow steps backwards. Then he disappeared into the dark. I didn't sleep. I didn't even move until my legs ached from standing. By then, I knew. Whatever his intentions were, they weren't harmless. He knew I'd booked for 3 nights. He knew I was alone. He had been testing, waiting. I waited until I thought enough time had passed, then quietly packed my bag. Every sound, the zip of the fabric, the scrape of gear, sounded deafening in that silence. When I finally crept down the stairs, my knife was already open in my hand. The forest swallowed me whole. Every snap of a twig felt like footsteps. Every shadow felt like him. I walked fast, then faster, until the trail began to vanish and I had to use my lantern. I hated turning it on. It made me feel like a spotlight in the darkness, but I had no choice. 5 hours later, the sky lightened. Dawn broke. I don't think I've ever been more relieved in my life. Even now, I replay it in my head. The grin, the note, the way he stood motionless at the bottom of those stairs, watching. What I can't stop thinking about is this. I told him I had booked for 3 nights. He knew I was supposed to still be there, which means when he came back, night after night, he expected me. If I hadn't left early, if I had stayed for that 3rd night, I honestly don't think I'd be here to tell this story.
I don't scare easily. I've done enough solo camping trips and long-distance drives that most things don't get to me. But this trip, the drive from northern Montana all the way to Alaska, still makes my stomach turn when I think back on it. I had spent months preparing. My SUV was converted into a small camping rig. Window shades, a sleeping setup in the back, cooking gear tucked away neatly. I was going to live out of that vehicle for 2 months. The highlight of it all was the legendary Alaska Highway, a road known for its sheer isolation. This wasn't some casual weekend road trip. Gas stations were hundreds of miles apart.
Civilization was thin. Out here, if something went wrong, you were on your own. I had accepted all of that. The one thing that bothered me, though, was that because I had to cross through Canada, I couldn't bring a firearm. Normally, I kept one tucked under my seat, a comfort more than anything. Out there, I had nothing. The first day went fine. 8 solid hours of driving. The scenery was stunning. Rivers, endless trees, mountain silhouettes in the distance. By sundown, though, I was drained. I pulled into a small campsite off the road. Nothing fancy, just one of those forested lots with a clearing big enough for a couple of cars. Nobody else was there. Perfect. I liked the quiet. It was late, so I didn't explore. Just parked, put up my shades, crawled into the back, and fell asleep. I don't remember waking up once. In the morning, the forest was damp and still, the air cool. I decided to stretch my legs before hitting the road again. That's when I noticed a trail leading deeper into the woods. It only took about 5 minutes to follow, but what I found at the end made my stomach knot. Another campsite, but it looked wrong. There were remnants of gear scattered everywhere. A torn sleeping bag, half a tent pole sticking out of the dirt, wrappers and clothing thrown about like someone had left in a rush. Some of the stuff was missing altogether, but what was left looked ripped or trampled. I didn't stick around. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right. I turned and hurried back down the trail. And that's when I saw it.
Parked right next to my SUV was a truck, all black, tinted windows, sitting there silently in the clearing I had just left empty. Nobody was outside of it, but I knew someone was watching me from inside. I didn't waste time. I jumped into my vehicle, locked the doors, and drove off without even glancing at the truck again. I pushed hard for the next few hours, not daring to stop. 3, maybe 4 hours passed before I saw a gas station. The kind of station that looks like it's been there since the 60s. One pump, no other cars. I pulled up, relieved, and started fueling. The pump was slow, but I didn't mind. Mountains stretched in every direction, painted blue and gray by distance. I was alone out here, and I liked it that way. Until I saw it. A shape coming down the road. As it got closer, my chest tightened. It was the same black truck. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't the same one. But as it pulled into the station, creeping right up to the other side of the pump, I knew. Same tinted windows, same black paint, shining like oil in the sun. Nobody got out. They just sat there, while my heart pounded so hard it felt like the sound filled the whole station. My pump clicked to a stop. I didn't even cap it properly. I just shoved the nozzle back, jumped into the driver's seat, and pulled out. I didn't look back. With a full tank, I felt better. I could put real distance between me and them. I drove until my eyes grew heavy and the sun dipped again. When I finally pulled off, I chose carefully. A trail off the road, half hidden by brush, leading to a small clearing. It looked unused, almost forgotten. That's what I wanted, somewhere they wouldn't find. I thought about pitching my tent, but something told me to stay in the SUV again. Safer, less exposed. The evening was peaceful enough. I cooked a quick meal outside, enjoyed the stillness of the forest, and watched the sun sink into a fiery horizon. For a while, I almost convinced myself the truck had been nothing more than coincidence. By 11, I was in the back of the SUV, scrolling through videos I had downloaded to pass time. I felt comfortable again, confident even. That's when I heard it. Crunch. A footstep. Dry sticks breaking under weight. Slow, deliberate. Not an animal. A person. I froze, phone screen still glowing faintly against my face. Then I looked toward the window.
and a man's face was pressed against it. I can still see it clearly. Pale skin, eyes locked on mine, breath fogging the glass. He didn't move. He just stared. I jolted back, gasping, heart clawing at my chest. By the time I sat up fully, he was gone. But before I could even process it, another figure came running out of the darkness, straight toward the SUV. Glass shattered as he smashed the back window with something heavy. My body acted on instinct. I dove into the front seat, fumbling with the keys. My hands shook so badly I could hardly fit them into the ignition. The other man appeared at the driver's side, yanking at the handle, pounding on the glass. At the same time, I felt a hand reaching through the broken back window, groping for the lock. Finally, the engine roared. As the back door swung open, I slammed the accelerator. The SUV shot forward, tires spitting gravel. The door banged shut from the force. And that's when I saw it. Off the trail, hidden between the trees.
The black truck. They had been following me all along. I don't remember much of the next mile. My body was pure adrenaline, my vision tumbled. I just drove, heart hammering, checking the mirrors every 2 seconds, waiting for headlights to appear behind me. They never did. Eventually, I pulled off, just long enough to shove the door closed properly and grab my phone. My hands shook as I dialed the police, hoping for a shred of service. The call barely went through. By the time I connected, there was nothing to report but broken glass and fear. No license plate, no clear look at their faces, nothing usable. And out there, in the middle of nowhere, help was hours away anyway. The rest of the drive into Alaska passed in a blur. I got my window repaired in a small town, but the feeling of being hunted didn't go away. Every truck I saw in the distance made my pulse race. Every time I pulled into a campsite, I checked the shadows twice, 3 times. What still chills me most isn't the break-in itself, but what it implied. Those men knew I was inside. They had followed me for hours, maybe an entire day. They had waited until I was at my most vulnerable, alone, in the dark, in the middle of nowhere. And then they struck. What they wanted, I'll never know. Robbery? Maybe. Something worse? Probably. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes, late at night, when I'm parked in my driveway and catch my reflection in the dark glass of my car window, I remember that pale face pressed against the glass, watching me, silent, waiting. And I wonder if next time I'll be so lucky.